Imagine a country that somehow managed to double its entire population, but at the exact same time completely lost its biological ability to grow naturally.
Right, which is wild to think about.
It really is. And picture this same nation eradicating its deadliest childhood diseases, only to engineer its way into a massively expensive medical trap.
Exactly, a total paradox.
And it actively depletes massive natural resources, pumps out heavy industrial emissions, but somehow still ends up mathematically wealthier and more sustainable on paper.
It definitely defies all those traditional economic models we usually rely on.
Yeah, it absolutely does. And that is exactly what we are unpacking for you today. Welcome to the Deep Dive.
We are so thrilled you're here with us.
Because today we're not just reading from some dusty, impenetrable textbook, We're looking at a literal masterclass in data visualization.
Right, it's this incredibly sleek internal slide deck.
Exactly. Designed strictly for expert analysts. It is titled Canada Under the Data Lens: Macro, Socioeconomic, and Environmental Evolution, 1960 to 2024.
And I think we really need to emphasize right at the top just how striking this document is, just purely from a structural and aesthetic standpoint.
Oh, it is beautiful. For you listening, I want to set the visual scene just once so you understand the lens we are using. Picture pure, stark, white backgrounds.
Very minimalist.
Super minimalist. The designer strictly forbade any clunky 3D graphics or over-embellished images. No cheesy stock photos of businessmen shaking hands.
Right, none of that.
The color palette relies entirely on these calming, low-saturation tones. Think Morandi gray blues, soft, dusty gray greens.
It feels very clinical, very objective.
Exactly. When a vital piece of data changes, there are just these flat, delicate annotations, like a dashed circle here or a sharp downward arrow there.
Which is so effective because stripping away all that visual noise really forces you to confront the raw data.
Yeah, the unfiltered reality of a nation's architecture. Even the cover slide is just this pure white background with a light gray wireframe map of Canada.
And that aesthetic actually serves a vital psychological function. It removes emotion from the equation entirely.
That is such a good point. And the mission for our deep dive today is to guide you through that exact objective reality.
We're pulling from this immense repository of World Bank, Statistics Canada, and UN data.
Right, to explore the anatomy of a nation transforming. We are tracking how a country evolves from a rapidly expanding post-war society into a highly mature, complex, modern state.
And if you're asking yourself, well, why Canada? Why should I care about this specific data set?
Yeah, why should you invest your time in this? Well, whether you are analyzing global markets, planning a business, or just curious about how modern human societies survive extreme macroeconomic pressure.
Canada is basically the ultimate test case.
It really is. It's a real-time laboratory for extreme growth, rapid aging, and the friction in the climate transition. So, let us jump right into the deep end.
Let's do it.
We need to start with the sheer scale of expansion, because it fundamentally rewrites the country's demographic engine.
Right, because if you want to understand any modern state, you absolutely have to start with its human volume.
And the data here tracks a trajectory from 1960 to 2024. The top line number is just staggering.
It really is. The total population didn't just grow, it more than doubled.
Doubled. We're looking at a baseline of roughly 17.9 million people in 1960.
And that skyrockets to over 41.2 million by 2024.
Which, on the surface sounds like this booming, unstoppable biological engine. You hear the population doubled, and you picture overflowing maternity wards.
Right, you think baby boom.
Exactly. But the data reveals something totally counterintuitive. Slide 4 has this visual called the scissors effect.
And the scissors effect is arguably the most consequential demographic pattern a nation can experience.
Let's break down exactly how this works for the listener. Imagine two lines on a graph that start relatively far apart and then aggressively converge.
With this light gray shading between them, showing the natural growth space.
Yeah, the top line represents the crude birth rate. Back in the 60s, it was hovering up near 26.7 births per 1,000 people.
Which is a vibrant, organically expanding society.
But then the trend line just plummets. It falls off an absolute cliff.
Yeah.
The deck uses a downward arrow to show it dropping all the way down to roughly 10 births per 1,000.
Meanwhile, you have to look at the bottom line, the crude death rate.
Right. What happens there?
Well, while the birth rate is collapsing, the death rate is just coasting along. It's incredibly stable, hovering right between 7.0 and 7.6 deaths per 1,000 across that entire span.
Okay, let's unpack this. The gap between those two lines, the space between 26.7 births and roughly 7 deaths, that gap is your natural growth.
That is your organic biological engine.
And what this data clearly shows is that this gap is squeezed shut. The natural growth window has just slammed closed.
It really has.
So my question is, if the organic growth engine has stalled out, but the population still rocketed to over 41 million, what is the actual mechanism of growth here?
Well, if force is an inescapable mathematical conclusion, when your biological engine dies but your total volume continues to double, that massive expansion is overwhelmingly driven by external immigration.
Oh, wow. So the state isn't growing from within anymore.
No, not at all. It is acquiring its population from the outside.
It is like looking at a legacy tech startup. In the early days, you rely on organic viral user growth. Everyone is young. The platform expands naturally.
Because the users are generating new users.
Exactly. But suddenly, organic growth stalls. To keep scaling the company, to keep the national economy expanding, you have to aggressively acquire new users externally.
Right.
But here's the catch. While you are bringing in these external users, your existing legacy user base is getting much, much older and requires entirely different support.
Which brings us right to the changing architecture of age. Slide 3 uses this gorgeous stacked area chart in dark gray, light gray, and gray blue to segment the population into age brackets.
And the shift over these 6 decades is profound, isn't it?
Absolutely. Back in 1960, seniors, meaning those aged 65 and older, made up a mere 7.6% of the population.
Barely a blip.
Exactly. It was a young country. But today, the chart circles the final value, showing that the 65 and older demographic has swelled to nearly 19%.
Almost 1 in 5.
Yeah, almost a fifth of the total population.
So how does that alter the fundamental social contract of the country?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, we have to talk about the dependency ratio. When only 7.6% of your population is over 65, your tax base is flush.
You've got an army of young workers paying taxes.
Right, funding the state, and very few retirees needing intensive elder care or pensions.
But when that flips to 19%?
The entire function of the state has to pivot. The state's economic output inherently shifts away from outward expansion and toward internal maintenance.
So more subsidized housing, more pensions.
And most aggressively, a massive expansion of the healthcare apparatus.
Which is the perfect bridge, actually, because this rising need for intensive support leads us directly into how the public health landscape has completely inverted.
It really has.
This data is a masterclass in contrasting historical triumphs with totally new modern terrors. Let's look at the infant mortality numbers on slide 5.
It's a scatterplot trend showing a monumental public health victory.
Yeah, in 1960, the data shows 27.8 infant deaths per 1,000 live births.
And it's worth noting that male infant mortality was even worse, sitting at over 31.
31. That means out of every 1,000 boys born, 31 didn't survive infancy. But then you track the data points, and there's this absolute cratering of the mortality rate.
A drop of over 80%.
They use a dashed circle around the 27.8 and the 4.4, connected by a huge downward arrow. Today, infant mortality has crashed to just 4.4.
It is arguably one of the greatest human achievements. It represents the triumph of maternal health programs, sanitation, and universal vaccination.
We literally engineered away the most tragic aspect of human biology.
But as this data ruthlessly points out, solving one existential problem usually just unlocks a new, vastly more complex one.
Right, because now we have to look at the modern threat landscape. Slide 6 features this stark donut chart, highlighting a complete shift in mortality causes.
And only one section is highlighted in this striking gray-red color.
Yeah, and that section represents non-communicable diseases, NCDs. A staggering 89.7% of all deaths are now caused by them.
Almost 90%.
We're talking cardiovascular disease, cancer, and diabetes. The data notes diabetes prevalence alone sits between 7.7 and 8.4% of the adult population.
Which is huge.
Meanwhile, communicable diseases and nutritional issues account for a tiny 4.5%. And injuries are just 5.6%.
What is fascinating here is the profound irony of modern medicine. By virtually eliminating early mortality and infectious disease, the healthcare system has basically succeeded its way into a new fiscal trap.
Break that down for us. Why is an NCD mathematically a trap compared to, say, a communicable disease?
It comes down to the duration of capital required. Historically, a citizen gets a bacterial infection. The state pays for penicillin, a cheap, acute intervention.
Right, it's fast.
Exactly. The patient recovers in a week and goes back to being a tax-paying worker, or they pass away. Economically speaking, it's a binary low-cost cycle.
But an NCD is chronic.
Yes. Diabetes or heart disease is degenerative. You aren't curing it with a pill in a wick. You are managing insulin or oncology treatments for decades.
The healthcare system is no longer an acute repair shop. It's a lifelong maintenance program,
Exactly.
which connects directly to what you listening are probably seeing in global markets.
Mhm.
There is a massive pivot right now away from acute cures toward chronic condition management, wearables, and elder care.
Because the biological data of how we die has changed. We die slowly of systemic degradation.
So that leads to a huge question. How does a country actually afford to pay for decades of chronic health care for a fifth of its population?
That brings us to the economic engine. Slide 7 shows the wealth generation metrics, and it's incredibly illuminating.
Let's start with the baseline trajectory. We're looking at a composite chart where gross national income, or GNI, per capita climbed from the low thousands in the 60s to a commanding high of over $50,000 today.
And the slide uses a red circle to highlight the 2020 pandemic contraction.
Right, GDP took a massive hit. But immediately following that is an upward arrow showing a sharp, distinct rebound.
It demonstrates deep economic elasticity. The nation took a historic shock, and yet the wealth generation engine snapped right back.
But GNI and GDP are kind of blunt instruments, right? They just measure cash flow. The absolute highlight of this deck is slide 8, which features a waterfall chart calculating adjusted net savings.
This is the real revelation. It calculates true national wealth.
So what does this all mean? Let's break it down. You take standard national savings, then you add education spending, which sits at a healthy 5 to 7% of GNI.
Because the model treats education as a wealth addition. It's an investment.
But then it deducts the depletion of energy and minerals. It deducts fixed capital consumption like wear and tear on infrastructure.
And most aggressively, it deducts the economic damage from CO2 and particulate emissions.
It's like looking at your personal finances.
Yeah.
You might feel rich because you have a lot of cash, but if your roof is caving in and your car is depreciating faster than you can pay it off, you're actually going broke.
That is a perfect analogy.
So I have to ask, Canada is heavily invested in mining, oil, and timber. When you deduct all that resource depletion and carbon damage, does Canada's adjusted savings actually stay in the positive?
The data provides a clear answer. Yes, it remains firmly in the positive.
Wait, really? How?
Because of that 5 to 7% of GNI added back for education, it proves Canada isn't just selling off the family silver to look wealthy.
They are genuinely reinvesting in sustainable growth.
Exactly. They're taking the rents from finite resources and investing them into infinite human capital.
And they are building a massive trade engine while doing it. Slide 9 uses symmetric bar charts to show dynamic trade balancing. Recent annual exports broke the $700 billion mark.
Which proves deep integration into global supply chains. They export highly engineered goods alongside primary resources.
But you cannot build a $700 billion export machine without highly optimized human resources, which bridges perfectly to slide 11, the Human Capital Foundation.
Right. This is where the data gets incredibly efficient.
We're looking at these simple progress bars showing near universal education. The adjusted primary net enrollment rate hovers around 99%,
And it explicitly points out absolutely perfect gender parity.
which leads right into the labor market evolution on slide 10. There is this dumbbell plot showing labor force participation.
For the 15 to 64 age bracket, participation is high, sitting in the 65 to 70% range.
But the real story is the massive narrowing of the employment gap between men and women over the decades.
Right. If we connect this to the bigger picture, this is exactly how Canada offsets its aging population.
How so?
Well, think about the dependency ratio again. Your senior cohort expanded to 19%. Your working age demographic is carrying an exponentially heavier burden.
So if women were still excluded from the workforce like in the 60s, the tax base would collapse.
Precisely. By ensuring nearly 100% of youth are educated, and by bringing women fully into the labor force, Canada maximizes the output of its shrinking working age demographic.
High human capital investment is the direct source of their productivity.
It is an economic survival tactic.
Think about that for a second. If you look at your own industry, how heavily does your field rely on the continuous upskilling of a smaller workforce to maintain output?
We're all trying to do more with less.
Exactly. Canada executed this strategy on a national scale. But here's the tension. While human capital is highly optimized, the physical resources face a totally different pressure.
Right, you can optimize a human brain, but you can't easily optimize a subarctic continent.
Which brings us to the green grid and the carbon paradox. Slides 12 and 14 are wild. Let's look at slide 14 first. It uses a waffle chart to show forest cover.
And it has remained remarkably stable at roughly 39%. That is about 3.47 million square kilometers.
An unfathomable amount of trees. It shows incredibly strict ecological protection. And then slide 12 has this 100% stacked bar chart showing a surprisingly green grid.
Right. Green represents hydro, and dark gray is fossil fuels. Hydroelectric power dominates at 56 to 61% of total electricity.
And the chart uses a downward arrow to show coal plummeting from over 17% down to a negligible sub 4%.
So they basically eradicated coal.
Right. So here's where it gets really interesting. You hear 60% hydro grid and stable forests, and you think, wow, a climate utopia. But then you look at the carbon challenge on slide 13.
The reality check.
Yeah, it's a line chart with a faint factory silhouette in the background. Despite the green grid, total carbon emissions remain massive. The transport sector alone outputs over 160 million tons of CO2 equivalent.
But the line chart does show per capita emissions dropping.
Right, from a historical high of around 18 tons down to roughly 14 tons.
So we have to synthesize this paradox. The data clearly shows GDP growth decoupling from carbon emissions. Unit carbon intensity is dropping.
Meaning they make more money while burning less carbon per dollar.
Exactly. But the total output is still stubbornly high because of the sheer physical geography of Canada. It requires massive transportation networks.
It's a colossal landmass. You can't just bike to the next province. And it's a heavy resource extraction economy. It takes immense energy to mine metals and harvest timber.
It is a nation walking a tightrope, acting as a global resource provider while simultaneously trying to decarbonize heavy industry.
But let me push back on this. If their grid is already 60% hydro, haven't they already picked the low-hanging fruit of climate action? How hard is that final stretch going to be?
That is the central anxiety here. The final stretch is exponentially harder. Getting coal off the grid is centralized. You build a dam, you route transmission lines.
It's expensive but localized.
Exactly. But decarbonizing a massive national transport sector means changing decentralized habits, millions of vehicles, and private freight companies spread across a frozen continent.
You have to invent new ways to mine ore without burning diesel.
The low-hanging fruit is completely gone.
Which brings us to the final slide. Slide 15, the synthesis. It uses a pentagram radar chart to summarize the 5 dimensions of modern Canada.
It's a very sobering summation.
The first is economic resilience, marked extremely high. Health lifespan is also extremely high. Education is extremely high.
But the low-carbon transition is just medium or improving.
And the final dimension, the youth demographic, is explicitly marked low.
Because that scissors effect cannot be undone.
So what are the core challenges moving forward?
There are 2 structural challenges. First, an acute labor shortage caused by deep systemic aging. And second, the monumental task of totally decarbonizing a resource-based economy when the easy hydro victories are exhausted.
It is a massive uphill battle, and that leaves me with a final provocative thought for you listening. Think about everything we just discussed. Canada has vast wealth, 99% education coverage, immense resources, and near limitless hydro potential.
They have every advantage.
Right. And if they find the final mile of demographic balancing and decarbonization, this incredibly difficult. What does that mean for the rest of the developing world trying to follow this exact same path?
It forces us to really question the viability of the global development model.
Exactly. Is the Canadian model a blueprint for the 21st century, or is it just an unrepeatable historical anomaly?
That is the ultimate question the data leaves us with.
It really is. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the data around you. Take care.